We are Hope and Larry Ware from Under the Median. Today, let's talk about 6 steps to a successful and low-stress monthly budget meeting. All right, so let's get started. Step number 1. First of all, we need to tell you that all the steps we are going to give you, this is all a culmination of over 30 years of having budget meetings together.
And learning the hard way.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. So we learned some of these things the most difficult way, which was by making mistakes. So we are sharing with you very clearly and very openly some of the mistakes that we made and how we corrected those mistakes so you can have a successful and low-stress budget meeting with your spouse. Step number 1, pick a time that is already not stressful. We learned this the hard way because I'm a very goal-oriented person. So I would total all the budget figures every month and I would be like really excited or really worked up, one or the other. And I would say, Larry, we really got it. We got to go over this stuff right now. And with Larry, if you ask him anything past 8 o'clock at night, yeah, he gets up very early in the morning to go to work. And so he would look at me and say, not now. Yeah, not now.
Not a good time.
And so I would literally have to say, get out your calendar, let's look at what's going on this week, and let's pick a time when it's good for both of us to sit down and have this conversation. So in step 1, you pick a time that is not already stressful and you respect your partner by picking a time that works for both of you. So what is an example of like a really stressful time that maybe you should avoid? If you have a really long, really overcommitted week already, that maybe is not the best time to schedule a budget meeting. At the end of the day, as I just mentioned, when your spouse is totally wiped out, not a good time for a budget meeting.
Well, usually one person is a morning person and the other person is a night person. So Hope and I are about as opposite as we can get.
Absolutely.
Except we have a lot in common, but as far as
as far
goes,
as our nocturnal habits, he is definitely a morning person. And I am
a night gal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can wind up about 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night and stay that way till 1 a.m. Not so with my husband. Step number 2, get comfortable. Bring snacks. Make coffee. Seriously. You want this to be a time when you're kind of coming together and you make it kind of special to sit down and do this and do something so that it's not something both of you are absolutely dreading doing, sitting down and having this conversation.
Yeah, it should be kind of an informal gathering where you both have time to look over the facts and figures and then, make some adjustments.
So make it special, make it comfortable, but we do want to say this is not a date night, all right? If this is the only date that you have all week or all month long, then we need to really get you plugged in to some amazing ideas for date nights that you can have for little or nothing. But you want it to be like comfortable, compatible. That's what you want it to be. So grab your coffee.
Yeah.
And make a snack. And you know what? I didn't make a snack tonight. I told Larry, I said, oh man, we're walking them through our budget meeting and I didn't make a snack. So we were going to try to find a snack, but so you get the idea. Make a snack.
We'll have
one later.
Yeah.
Step number 3. Get all of your supplies together and bring them with you. What do I mean by supplies? What kind of supplies do you need for a budget meeting? So here's some ideas of what we bring to our budget meeting. First of all, you need one person who is in charge of gathering all the supplies and all the information. This is a really great example of too many cooks in the kitchen. Generally, there is one person, the budget nerd.
Yeah, I was going to say, usually in a marriage, there's a spender, That would be me. And a saver. That would be Hope. Hope would save everything. I mean, she does this with everything we have in the house. And I would parse things out a little more generously.
That is absolutely true.
The saver is usually the better budget person.
Yes.
Because they're the ones that are going to put this thing down on the paper, do the organizing, and write it out. So she's really the best one at doing that. So I let her put it all together.
Now, if this is your first budget meeting, you're probably not going to have a budget all worked out. So in that case, whoever is the person in the couple that is in charge of gathering all the facts and figures, both of you need to write down every penny that you spend during that 30 days. You should come to the first budget meeting, to the initial meeting, with that information. If you've had a chance to go over it and you're a budget nerd, I'm going to tell you that you've already taken all of those expenses and sort of categorized them in your head, right, into different categories. So if this is your initial budget meeting and your first time of hashing out a budget together, you're not going to have a budget. If you do, then it's probably going to be something that whoever is the saver and the budget nerd has looked at the facts and figures and said, I think this is about what we'll spend on going out to eat. And I think this is about representative of what we're spending on food. That's okay. If you're the budget nerd, you can come with your facts and figures all together and say, this is a budget that I am proposing. Mm-hmm. So you're not dictating, you are proposing, this is what it looks like and this is what I think will work. Then you need to get ready for a conversation, because you are not the only person in a couple. A couple is two, not just one.
And may I say, if you've never done a budget before, the first step is to record everything that you're spending. And we found it very helpful. We both worked on this. I would record things. We had just a ledger that we would write the amounts that we were spending into. It's easier if you write them in as soon as you can. So if you go into the store, when you come home, take the receipt, go to your book, write the date, where you spent it, and the amount, and what it was. Was it food? What category does it fit? You're going to have to categorize some of these things. Then the other step would be to write down how much you make, your earnings. It might be more than one source. So in our case, we would have bi-weekly earnings, and we would record that. So that gives you an idea of where you're at. That was our very first step.
But believe it or not, even though I am the budget nerd, he is incredibly concrete, sequential, and he was the one who would at the end of every day say, what did you spend? And he was very, very good at making sure that we got all of those expenses down immediately into the budget ledger after we had spent them. Mm-hmm. So if this is not your first budget meeting, you're going to come with whatever budget you have in the form that it is. It takes more than 1 or 2 months to work out all the kinks in a new budget. So do not let that upset you. Don't after a couple of months say, well, this whole thing isn't working, and just throw in the towel. It takes, in our experience, about 5 months of budgeting together before most of those rough edges are sort of smoothed off, and you have a really good idea at that point of what your monthly budget is honestly going to look like.
Yeah, it's a process. It doesn't all come at once. There's a learning curve, and you learn and adjust as you go and improve on it.
Okay, so continuing on step 3, you're going to bring supplies, which means you're going to bring copies of all the important papers. The important papers are your budget, or your budget synopsis. I don't bring the whole budget every time. I just bring a list of each category, what the budget is for that category, and what we spent that month.
Why don't you give them just a brief example of a couple of categories so they understand?
Oh,
what you're
food.
talking
Food
about.
is a major category. Almost everything I put in the budget ledger, I'm like, oh, look, it's more food. So
Car expenses,
you have
gas.
car expenses, you have gas. If you have a car payment, if you don't have a car payment, one of your line items in your budget should be a car replacement fund. We're going to talk about that just a little bit later in this video, and we're going to give you some really concrete examples of how this works in our life. So bring that budget and bring your list of goals. I tell people this all of the time. There are a couple of things that you need every single year. One of those is a written budget. The other thing you need is your net worth. Your net worth is simply, that's a fancy way of saying looking at everything that you own versus everything that you owe. You subtract what you owe from what you own, and that is your net worth. You need to know that because that will tell you immediately whether you have a positive net worth, which means you own more than you owe, or you have a negative net worth, which means you have some debt you're dealing with. And dealing with that debt and paying off that debt to remain debt-free should be one of your number one priorities and goals. The third thing that you do at the first of every year is you write a list of short, medium, and long-term goals. Why? Why do they need a list of goals? What's the deal with the list? Can't they just think about it and keep it in their head?
Well, the Bible talks about in Proverbs, without a vision, the people perish. And if you don't have a goal to shoot for, you'll be just working this aimlessly. You have to have specific goals. We had a specific goal of saving up for a house, and we just pulled everything together toward reaching that goal. And we kept that in front of us all the time. We made that a major commitment. And so when you're committed to something, you're more than likely going to stick to it as long as you have a goal and a plan to get there.
That's right. So that's why you need a list. Let's say that you don't make very much money. You're like, yeah, I don't make very much money. I can't have any goals. No goals because I don't make very much money. You particularly need to have a list of short, medium, and long-term goals. Just because you don't make a big paycheck does not mean that you are somehow abdicated from the idea of making a list of short, medium, and long-term goals. You absolutely do. It does not matter if you make a little or you make a lot. You need to have a list of goals to know what you're shooting for.
Yeah.
What other supplies do we bring? So we're going to give you some examples. We like to bring highlighters to our budget meetings because sometimes you just want to draw attention to something. You don't need to rewrite it. You just need to highlight it so you're aware of it in your head. Let's say that I went over in groceries one month. He's going to highlight that, and it's probably going to be to remind him that he needs to say, how are we doing on groceries? So the next month, not to be, intrusive, but to help me stay on budget. He might go, so how are we doing? And to keep us on track with the groceries. So you might very well need a highlighter. The budget plan and the short, medium, and long-term goals, you need to make 2 copies, one for each of it. You will notice that each of us has a copy of our agenda for this because we each have something we want to give to the meeting tonight and that we want to make sure that we cover in the meeting tonight. So everybody gets their own list. Everybody gets the list of the budget, list of the goals, and you're going to need something to write with because you will want to make notes as you go through. Now, as you are getting together for your budget meeting, you need to take this step. You need to be aware of your spouse's learning style when you are preparing materials for the budget meeting. Why does that make a difference? I'm going to tell you why. And this is a story about the first time I told Larry, I said, hey, we're going to live within our means and we're going to pay cash for our next car. And his response was, you are
insane.
Yes, because we were both making $5 an hour. That's right, $5 an hour. It was 1988. We were just married. We were flat broke, making $5 an hour each. And he said, there is no way that's going to happen. So the first thing I did was, knowing that my husband is incredibly visual and concrete sequential, I made a written budget and I made charts that showed where we were financially, where we wanted to be financially, and the steps we were going to take to get from point A to point B. Once he saw that,
I was on board.
He was on board 110% because he had seen it. So think about what your partner needs to see. Do they need to see it in writing? Do they need to see a flow chart? Do they need to see a pie chart? Do they just need like a goal where you have the starting amount here and the ending amount here, and you're going to fill it in and color it in as you go up? Whatever you need to stay on track and keep moving toward goals, that's what you need. And those are the documents you need to bring to the budget meeting. Now, music. Do you listen to music during a budget meeting? This is a little controversial in our house because...
Well, I like music all the time. So I would have it on. It's not terribly important while we're trying to discuss a budget, though.
So he likes music a lot. It helps him focus. It helps him concentrate. It distracts me. I can't do two things at once. So your choice, your decision, there's no right answer, but you both need to be able to focus. So if listening to soft music in the background makes you feel revved up and ready to go to work, put music on. If it distracts one of you, you may want to just can the music for a while, have your budget meeting, and then put it on afterwards. All right, number 4 is consider your spouse's love language when communicating about money. Now, you'll notice this is step number 4, and we haven't even gotten to talk about specifics as far as the budget meeting is concerned. There is a lot of work that goes into and happens before your budget meeting even starts. And each one of these steps is equally important to you having a stress-free budget meeting. So why in the world would your spouse's love language make a difference in a budget meeting? Because your partner's love language will determine the items that are most important to them in the budget. We will give you a specific example from our budgeting, and that is giving gifts. Larry loves to give money away. He really, really does. For me, not so important. But we had to learn that your love language is a huge, huge way that you are motivated in every aspect of life, including where money is concerned. So you wanted to give money.
Right. Well, I had different people that from time to time it came to our attention that they needed some help, and I wanted to have something in our budget that was a little more fluid, not quite as locked down, that we could release to supply some needs every once in a while.
So he requested a fund be put into our budget in order to cash flow giving, because extra giving was really, really important to him. So listen and consider your spouse's love language when you are budgeting together. Be prepared to compromise. There is no one sarge in charge when it comes to a budget meeting. You are a team, and this is a group effort. So be prepared to compromise.
And it's good for the person that's in charge to take some of the suggestions that maybe the secondary person might have to add. That way they feel like they're a part of it and they're not just sitting on the outside while somebody does all
just
the work.
Just loose baggage. No, not so.
And it's not fair to hope for me to make her do everything and make her make all the decisions in it either. So we do work together. When we hit a problem area where we've gone over, we have to look and say, well, what caused that? Why did we go over? What do we need to do next month to either prevent that or make some adjustments? And we'll work together on finding a solution for that.
So be prepared. Be prepared to compromise. Be prepared to problem solve. Come to the table with your problem solving hat on. Don't come to the table with your I'm going to have it all my way hat on. This is problem solving mode.
And it's teamwork.
And the third thing is be prepared to change your preferred method of problem solving. Your problem solving method may be just hit it hard. We need to get this, to get this goal goal conquered and we need to do it now and we need to do it fast and hard. Whereas in reality, it may go a lot more smoothly in your family if you back off just a little bit and problem solve a little differently and go at the problem a little bit from a different angle. We are now at step number 5. Now we're actually going to go into the nuts and bolts of exactly what happens in a budget meeting. We have covered the first 4 steps, just prepping you to even get to this point. We've talked about picking a time that's not already stressful, getting comfortable and bringing your snacks and your coffee, bring all the supplies to the budget meeting, and consider your spouse's love language when you come to the table. Now, number 5, the 5th step is when you begin the budget meeting, be sure to cover the good stuff first. Why? Why was it bad when I immediately started out our budget meeting with all the problems I saw?
Well, if you start out on a negative note, that kind of sets the tone for the whole meeting, for one. I would usually just kind of look at her and say, well, what do I need to do? Go out and get a second job or what? So it's good to start out on a positive note, cover the areas that you're doing right. Take those first. So that way you're starting off on a good foot.
He would think that we were in awful shape. He'd go, oh man, we're going down the hole in fast order. Should I get a second job? Should I change career? Are people coming to repossess the dog? And I was like, no. And I would look at him just confused and say, no. Well, we got a lot of areas we're doing good in. And he was like, then start with the good stuff.
Well, and we had the dog paid for.
Yeah.
I just want to make that
clear. So start with the good stuff first. So I want you to talk about these things first. Where are you succeeding? What are the areas that are in really solid shape in the budget? What are the categories that are out or under budget? If I had rocked it that month on the food budget, I would be like so hyped to tell him. I was like, we got to the end of the month and I had $50 left over, which was pretty much unheard of, really. If that happened, I would be like super excited.
You can probably tell that's the most difficult category to keep in line.
It is a little bit. Budget. It is a little bit. So what categories are we doing good at? Where are we succeeding? Have you reached a major milestone or goal? Because I kept the budget figures. He was never immediately aware when we actually reached a goal. Now that doesn't have to be a huge goal. That can be a small goal. Let's say that you are saving to pay cash for next Christmas in December, which I highly, highly recommend. And you're setting aside a certain amount every month, and then you're able to put a little extra toward it, and it gets to be about July, and you are super pumped because you've already maxed out that account. You have all the money saved for Christmas in December. That's not a huge goal. It's not a goal that's really far out in the distance. It's a pretty immediate goal, but you want to share that right away, because when you share things that are like, yeah, we did that, for one thing, that makes the team feel like, okay,
it's working.
We're in it. This is working. Budget is hard work sometimes. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when you have to take up delayed gratification over and over and over again, it can get to be very discouraging. But if you see along the way that we're reaching some of these milestones, we're getting there, we are making progress, that will keep your budget fire lit and keep you moving forward into the future that you really, really want to attain for yourselves as a couple.
It's a great motivator, yeah.
And then the final thing under this category of cover the good stuff first is, are there any praise reports? Were there any moments during this week or this month that God really showed up big time and met some needs that you had? Those are so important to share together as a couple, because those moments will also be one of those things that carry you forward. Because on those months when it didn't go so good, you can look back to that budget meeting notes and say, oh my goodness, look what God did 6 months ago. And you will know that God is still faithful and you're still going to keep moving forward and it's going to be okay. It really sort of resets your barometer when you're able to remember those moments.
Oh yeah, we all need encouragement, and that does give some encouragement and incentive to continue.
So what do you do after you've covered all the good stuff? You probably can figure out what the last step of a budget meeting is. It's to cover the stuff that I won't say is not so good, and I won't say the bad stuff. This is the stuff, these are areas that are being very challenging to your budget. There's always going to be some of them.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of the year, I create like a master list that shows every budget category, what we expected to spend and what we actually spent. And then I color code it with highlighters that show the budget categories that we were at or under budget in one color, and those we went over in another color. In 31 years of budgeting, never have I ever had an end of the year synopsis that had all one color. There are always areas that are going to be challenging, but now you've set yourself up for success because you've looked at all the good stuff, you've remembered God's amazing provision for your family, you know that you're making headway towards your goals and your milestones, and now you're ready to tackle those things that are a little bit hard. Mm-hmm. So, when you approach trouble spots and you are the budget coordinator, they call me the budget queen in this house. Do not approach your partner with a heavy hand. I am just telling you right now that you cannot emotionally, mentally, or verbally ram into your partner. I tell you from hard-won experience that usually the person who isn't handling the budget does not know nearly as much about the budget as you think they do or should. And so you can't say, this is the way it's going to be.
Well, and it may not be anyone's fault that a category goes over. There are unexpected expenditures. Now, we set a certain amount for car repairs every year. And because I bought 2 very low maintenance cars a couple of years ago, we really lowered the boom on that amount. And then we got into a little bit of overage when we had a major repair on one of the cars last summer when the air conditioner went out and we had to replace the whole unit. We weren't expecting that. This was a car that was supposed to be reliable, and it is, except the air conditioner went out. And so those things will happen, and you just have to say, well, okay, we went over. What do we do next year? What do we adjust? And you work with it.
So the trouble spots. These are the areas you went over. First of all, when we talked about the car repair bill, we were really bummed. I have to say, it was $900.
That's a lot of money.
And which is a lot of money, and it was more than we had in that account. So we had to pull money from the emergency fund. Ideally, now when you begin budgeting, you may not have a 3 to 6 months emergency fund waiting to take care of emergencies. The first thing you want to do is save up a $1,000 emergency fund. That's step one. Later on down the line, you're going to want to have 3 to 6 months of emergency money sitting in that emergency fund. We pulled money for the emergency fund, and I will admit to you, when I did the end of the year budget totals, I saw that like $900 bill, and it still stung. It stung a little less because it was almost $1,000, and I told Larry, I said, I'm going to call and explain to them that we budget and we're paying cash for this, and would they knock 10% off the final bill? And they did. So it stung a little less because it was $1,000 or $100 less than it was going to be, but it was still $900. And he looked at me and had to remind me, I'm the one who takes care of the budget. Remember this. He had to physically remind me that we had taken the money from the emergency fund. So although that category looked really sad at the end of the year, we had covered it with money from the emergency fund. So sometimes you need each other to remind each other that it's not really as bad as it looks. So be sure that you don't use a heavy hand, neither one of you, when you're speaking about trouble spots. The second thing to do is be prepared to leave the table without everything figured out. Mm-hmm. There are just times when you have to really take time to think about what you should do. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's never one right answer, and if you're already living with a budget that seems kind of tight, you'll look at all the rest of the categories and think, good heavens, when are we gonna, start taking care of this, and when are we gonna, where's this money gonna come from? So it's okay to look. The first thing, of course, you're going to look at are those areas that you talked about for the first half of the budget meeting, which are the green light areas. Those are the good areas that are already humming along as they should be. Sometimes there's money available in those budget areas where you can pull back just a little bit in order to fund these other budget areas. But even as long as we've been budgeting, it's very seldom that I set a budget on January 1st and it does not change at least some before December 31st. Larry, you want to talk about like what is the process when we think, uh-oh, this really isn't working? Sometimes it's an anomaly, like the car repair bill for $900. We are hoping against hope that that was an anomaly. What happens when it looks like there really is a problem with us consistently overspending in this area? What does that look like, and what do we do to fix it?
Well, if it's an item that we can adjust by maybe looking, let's look at our internet outlay, for instance. We were paying, I can't remember what we were paying to a local company for internet and phone, and our son found us a much cheaper plan with a brand new startup company. And that saved us, I don't know, I think about 33%, didn't it?
Right.
And so that cut that category down. So you look for ways that you can cut, practical ways. Do we need this item? Do we need to have, for instance, we've never had cable TV. We just don't feel that it's necessary for the way that we view television. And I put antennas up in the attic. We watch off air a little bit. Most of our viewing comes from library, Blu-rays or DVDs. So we've tried to find some ways to take categories and put them into the minimal amount as possible in order to have what we really want in other categories.
Right. So look first at categories that are obvious. Usually in all of our budgets, there's a category or two that you're like, yep, I could give that up if I absolutely had to.
Yeah, like, do we really need water?
Then you begin to look at areas that you think you can cut back on. I will say that entertainment is an obvious area that if you're going out to eat 4 or 5 times a month and all of a sudden you have a need in a budget category, you can cut that back. Mm-hmm. You can also cut back sometimes in areas like food. Food can generally be cut back a little bit. So you begin to look for areas that are nickels and dimes. Mm-hmm. Now, when Larry and I decided that I had this grand idea that we would save and we would pay cash for the home we're currently living in, which we did. But you have to remember that during the amount of time that we saved to pay cash for this house, our average income was $35,000 a year. When we started saving for this home, we had 1 child. When we finished saving for this home, we had 4 children. So with an average income over those 12 years of $35,000 a year, we had this conversation not once, but many times. And we actually got to a standstill. I don't know if you remember this. There was a point about 2 years before we bought the home where we really looked at each other and said, I think we've cut it as much as we possibly can. There are no other areas to cut. And that was when we really, really went to town. And we were brutal in slicing little amounts off of every area we could. And when we finished slicing small amounts off of probably a dozen categories, I added it all up. And we looked at the final total on the paper. And Larry's response was, now we're talking some real money. So there generally are some areas that you can cut back if you need to.
And I must say, it's not always easy to do this. It takes a lot of discipline. And once again, you have to have that goal fixed. Part of what helped us to maintain that goal is we would go to open houses. So we just kept that going. Every Sunday there's an open house, maybe 4 or 5 in this area. And by continuing, it's like putting that carrot in front of the rabbit for a race. You keep that carrot in front of you, and you'll work toward that goal. we cut out things that, they were hard things. We cut out all eating out. We cut our internet. In order to get on the internet, we would go to the library or go to McDonald's or whatever we had to do, or we even got permission one time to use the neighbor's Wi-Fi. But we managed to do that in order to reach the goal that we had in mind.
Our goal was firm in our head, and we were willing to do anything we needed to. The mantra in the house, and the boys kept repeating it, was, if we can't eat it or wear it, we don't need it. So we have been down this road with difficult budgets, and we've made hard choices, so we understand them. But those are our 6 tips for having a successful budget meeting.